All right, so for today, what we're going to do, I've just started recording. So today, on a new page, start a whole new page and put Unit 10, the smartphone era. We're getting into the smartphone era, the Emma Price story. So we're going to get, this unit will end with memory as opposed to history, right? The last thing I have in this unit is Biden being elected and Biden's COVID response, right? So, that's hardly history. That's only like a month ago. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty weird, huh? Pretty strange, but here we go. All right, so the smartphone era, this is our modern era. This is the era that I think is most characterized by the invention of cell phones, right? This is the first era that is completely on the internet. Everyone's online, everyone is comfortable online, everyone's using computers all the time, right? The last era, computers were there, but they weren't super common. It wasn't everyone, right? But this era, everyone has a cell phone, right? Everyone has a cell phone, and smartphones get invented pretty quick in this era. So pretty soon, everybody has like the internet in their pocket, right? And that is a radical change for the world. So, and it's hard. It's very hard for someone your age to recognize how much this has changed, because again, this is normal for you, right? Because I'm assuming you were born in what, 05, 06, something like that?
03.
03? Okay, so you're a little bit older. All right, so that's fine. So you were born in 03. The first smartphone was created in 04, right? So your entire life has been with a cell phone, right? Your entire life has been with a cell phone, with a smartphone. My daughter was 06. My daughter was born in 06, and when she was born, we had smartphones. Because as an infant, she would slap my cell phone, and I distinctly remember smartphones, right? So here we are. So in order to start this unit, though, we have to start with a contested election. We have to start with a contested election. So big number A is going to be Bush v. Gore. Bush v. Gore. So this is the election in 2000. The election in 2000, and Bush becomes president. Bush is going to win this, and we call this Bush v. Gore because that's the name of the Supreme Court case. So, so what ended up happening? This race was between Bill Clinton's vice president, Al Gore, and George Bush, who was the son of the previous George Bush. Okay, so it's Al Gore versus George Bush and George W. Bush. And the race is so tight, mostly because Americans don't really like either candidate all that much. Americans are generally kind of unhappy with both candidates. It's not like both candidates are like evil or whatever. It's just that they're both kind of like meh, right? Like Americans just aren't super excited about either candidate. And so it has very, very low turnout, and it's very, very close. Most American elections are very close, right? Even the biggest blowout elections are really only won by like 4%, 5%, maybe, right? And that's like a blowout election. Most elections are won by like 1% of the country. So this basically comes down to a tie. It comes down to a tie in Florida, right? The entire country basically is tied up. Florida is the only state left that they have to count. And then it comes down to a tie in just Miami-Dade County in Florida. So it comes down to one county in Florida. So let it sink in for a moment. The entire fate of the country is resting on Florida. Oy, oy, right? I'm not sure what state we would like the country to rest on, but I guarantee it's not Florida. Right? I think if the entire country rested on the fate of, like, say, I don't know, Minnesota or something, it'd probably be okay, right? Like most people like Minnesota, but like not Florida. Oh boy. All right. So And then even within Miami-Dade County, right? Miami County is the largest city. Miami is the largest city in Florida, right? And Miami has a lot of Latinos, it has a lot of blacks, it has a lot of whites. It's a very diverse city, one of the most diverse cities in the country, right? It also has a lot of like retirees from the north. It has a lot of conservatives. It has a lot of a lot of conservatives, a lot of liberals, Democrats, Republicans, right? It's a very, very diverse county, one very, very diverse. And Miami-Dade County comes down to almost a tie. They do a recount, they get one number. They recount again, they get another number. They recount again and they get another number. Each of these numbers is about 1,000 off, right? The problem is that the margin here is only 537 votes. So if you're 1,000 off, then that's too many, right? 1,000 off maybe is a big deal, right? If you're 1,000 off in California, the Democrats still probably won by 5 million votes. You know what I mean? 1,000 off in Utah doesn't matter much because the Republican probably still won by 1 million votes. You know what I mean? So 1,000 doesn't really matter in a lopsided state like Utah or California. But in a state like Florida, where it's exactly 50-50, 1,000 matters a lot. So what happens is Gore tries to get the recount, Bush sues to stop the recount. They go back and forth. It goes to the Florida Supreme Court, and from the Florida Supreme Court, it goes up to the National Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of the United States. There's a lot of controversy here, a lot of controversy back and forth. And the controversy is due in some part because Bush's brother is the governor of Florida. Right? His brother is the governor of Florida. The attorney general of Florida, who's in charge of the recount, is a close person of the Bush family, who's been friends of the Bush family since she was born, basically, right? And so a lot of people are crying foul, and they're saying, of course, Bush's brother and Bush's family friend wants to stop the count. Of course they do, right? Because, you know, family does what family does, right? Well, it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upholds it. They stop the recount. Bush is declared the winner. Bush is elected. Let's make a little notification here, right? Bush is elected. He does not get the popular vote. He does not get the popular vote, but he does win the Electoral College. So he wins. He becomes president, right? And about 25% of the country feels like this election is illegitimate or that the election had been stolen in some way because they think Shenanigans, his brother and the family friend, stole the election. And so they call shenanigans on it. Okay. I don't have any evidence that it was actually stolen, but I'm telling you that that's how people felt. Right? Okay, so let's go to B. B for Bush. Let's better know a president now.
Yeah.
All right, so Bush. This is, now when you write his name, you have to write the W in the middle. George W. Bush, so you don't mix him up with his daddy, right? His dad, who was the president before Clinton, his dad was George H. W. Bush, Herbert Walker. This is George Walker Bush, right? He's not technically a two, George Bush two. He doesn't have a two on his name, and he's not a junior technically, right? But a lot of people are going to call him junior, or they're going to call him Bush two. A lot of people just call him that, even though it's not actually his name, right? He's oftentimes referred to as just W. A lot of times they just call him W. W. D-U-B-Y-A. W. Right? All right. So W, before he became president, he was the governor of Texas. And before he was the governor of Texas, he was rich. He was actually rich of Texas too, but he made a lot of money on oil, basically. The Bush family has a lot of oil, right? A lot of oil money. So he's the son of a president. He's an oil man, and he became the governor of Texas. His ranking is generally pretty bad. He's profoundly unpopular when he leaves office, very, very unpopular when he leaves office. And his popularity continues to drop until Trump is elected. And then everyone says, oh, wow, there was someone worse. um, that's
Yikes.
a lot of people say. And generally speaking, he is held in pretty low regard because of the way he handled the Iraq War. That the Iraq War is generally viewed as a failure, right? There's also he's held in pretty low regard because of the 2008 financial crisis that happens under his watch, and some other stuff like Hurricane Katrina and some other stuff like that. And so he's just generally viewed as a bad president. Oftentimes he's in like the bottom 10. He's in the bottom 10. I've seen him often in the bottom 5. I've seen him as low as second from the bottom before. So why did we elect this guy in the first place? We elected this guy because he has some charm. He's got charm. He's got some charisma, right? People want to have a beer with him, right? He'd like to have a beer with him, right? This is like a running thing that was going through the political campaigns at the time, is that people would be like, which president do you want to be around? Which president would you want to hang out with, right? And Al Gore is like super, super boring, right? And like nobody wants to hang out with him because he's like the most boring man on the planet. And so people are like, if I were to sit down and have a beer with Al Gore, he would just sit there and lecture me about global warming. But if I sit down and have a beer with George Bush, we'd have a good time, go bowling and hang out, And so that becomes like his credential. It's like people like him. You can't discount charm, because part of the job is to be charming, right? Like it's politics, right? You got to get people to work with you. So his presidency is dominated by 9/11. There's just nothing else you can say about that, really. It's everything else in the country is second to 9/11 and terrorism. Okay, how long have we been going? 9/11 is kind of big. I don't know if we want to do it. Okay, let's do 9/11. Let's do it. All right, so big number C. Big number C is 9/11. All right, so, oh, my dates are not right on this. He is elected, he's inaugurated in 01. Yeah, I'll fix that date. I'll fix it later. Okay, so 9/11. All right, so for the year that Bush is before 9/11, the 9 months he's president before 9/11, he's looking like he's going to be a one-term president. He's going to be forgotten. Half the country thinks he kind of stole the election, or election shit. Half the country thinks that a large section of the country likes him because he seems like a good guy to go bowling with, but he doesn't seem like he's substantial. 9/11 happens. On September 11th, 2001, on September 11th, 2001, 4 planes were hijacked. 4 planes were hijacked by an organization called Al Qaeda. I'll spell Al Qaeda for you. AL space QAIDA. Okay, AL space QAIDA. There's different spellings. QAEDA is another spelling, but I'm going to stick with the I, because that's the one that gets used in the news the most often. Al Qaeda is it's an international terrorist organization. It's an international terrorist organization that it primarily targets the United States. It's led by one of history's greatest assholes, Osama bin Laden. So, Osama bin Laden, who is hiding in Afghanistan at this time, he arranges for a bunch of these terrorists to come to the United States, and they hijack the plane. On the morning of September 11th, the first plane gets hijacked out of Boston, Massachusetts, and it gets turned around, and it flies into New York City, and it crashes into the World Trade Center. It crashes into the first tower over here. The second plane gets hijacked also out of Boston. Also out of Boston, and it flies into the second tower. The towers are called the World Trade Center. Collectively, they're called the World Trade Center. Tower 1, Tower 2. The first plane hits up here, higher on the building, if you see on the picture. It hits higher on the building and it starts fires and stuff within the building. And as soon as that happens, the New Yorkers start to evacuate this building. They also immediately start to evacuate the second tower as well.
Mhm.
Now remember, what happened at the World Trade Center before in New York?
There was already a different attack that happened. I can't remember the exact name of it, but
Yeah.
this isn't New York's rodeo with terrorism.
It's not their first rodeo, exactly, right? And the previous guy had driven a car bomb into the parking garage underneath, right? But this one is different, okay? So New York is already evacuating these buildings as soon as this happens, before they even know it's a terrorist attack. They don't know it's a terrorist attack at first. Another plane had crashed into the towers before, and it was just like a little, like, one-person plane, where the guy, like a little tiny plane, and the guy had like a stroke while he was flying the plane and was trying to get back to the airport and crashed into the building, right? And so, and that had happened like a year or two earlier, and it was just a little plane. It didn't kill anybody. Well, it didn't really do a lot of damage, but New Yorkers at this point didn't know what was happening, right?
Mhm.
By the time the second plane hits the tower, it's clear what's happening. The second plane hits the tower. Now, there's a woman on the first plane. She's a stewardess named Betty Ong, O-N-G, Ong, and she's the stewardess, and she calls into the flight control and she says, "Hey, our plane's been hijacked." She says these men stabbed people. They stabbed pilots and stabbed people and took over the plane. And they had released some kind of pepper spray into the plane so no one could see or breathe. And she's calling and talking to the air traffic controllers when her plane crashed into the building and she died. And so that's how they know. We have her. You can like Google, you can like do her on YouTube, and you can hear the phone call. You can hear the call. I played it for class, for the people in class, but it doesn't work over Zoom very well, so you're gonna have to do it on your own. And she calls it in. She calls it in, and then the plane crashes, right? And you can hear the operator calling for her and talking to her, but the line's still, you know, it's dead, obviously. The next plane hits the tower. It hits much lower on the tower. And when it hits much lower on the tower, as you can see here, right, it's more weight above the fire. And so the second tower actually collapses first. When the second tower collapses, the rumbling and the damage from the second tower hurts the already weakened first tower, and the first tower collapses as well. By this point, a third plane has been hijacked. A third plane has been hijacked, this one out of Washington, D.C. The third plane out of Washington, D.C. was hijacked. It turns around and it crashes into the Pentagon. Now, the Pentagon, do you know what the Pentagon is? What kind of a building that is?
That's where a lot of the government stuff happened.
Yeah. Do you know
That's
what
all
part?
there.
Yeah. Do you know what part of the government it is?
I kind of want to say executive, but I'm not sure.
Well, it is executive, but more specifically, put it in your notes here. It hits the Pentagon. The Pentagon is the headquarters for the military,
Oh, okay.
for all four branches of the military: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and they're all headquartered there in the Pentagon. Now, the Pentagon is not a big. The Pentagon is a very large building, but it's a mostly flat building, right? You can see in the picture here, it's only 5 stories or 6 stories, right? So it's not a huge building. It's not a very tall building. And so when the plane hits the Pentagon, the other side of the Pentagon feels rumbling, but it's, you know, it's not the same kind of a deal, right? Only a
Right.
couple, only like less than 200 people die in the Pentagon, a much smaller number, a much smaller number. I don't want you to think that their death is not as meaningful, right? But it's just not as dramatic as the towers. The fourth plane is hijacked. It's a plane that left New York. At this point, the country is going on lockdown, right? The country is going on lockdown. All airports across the country are all closed. Airports across the country are closed, and the word is out that this is a terrorist attack, right? This is a declaration of war. The fourth plane gets hijacked. It's the red one in this picture here, Flight 93. It gets hijacked over Ohio, and it's heading back to Washington, D.C. It was supposed to crash into the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., try to kill the government. And this is where the passengers inside of Flight 93 break through the door, get in a fight with the terrorists. The terrorists had taken the plane, moved in, got themselves in the cockpit. The passengers decided to fight back, and in the course of the fight, the plane crashes into it just crashes into nothing, into the like a farm in the middle of Pennsylvania. Kills everyone on the plane, of course, but it also doesn't kill, Washington, D.C. So all told, on this day, we end up losing almost 3,000 people. 2,977 Americans are killed. Of the 3,000 people killed, about 500 of them are New York Fire Department and Police Department and emergency services who are going into the buildings trying to save people. Right? And they're trying to save people when the buildings collapsed on them. This is the worst attack in American history. We've only ever been attacked on our home soil twice in American history, 9/11 and what's the other time?
Is that Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the United States has only ever been attacked twice on its homeland, on its home soil, right? We're pretty far away from our enemies, right? We got oceans in between us. And so it's hard to attack us. And that's nice for us. It's good for us. Yeah. And our only neighbors are our friends. Mexico and Canada are both friendly nations to us, so we don't have to worry about them. This is a profoundly difficult thing for adults to think and talk about. This is one of these events that adults will tell you that their entire life changed. So let's talk long-term consequences. So the next line down, the consequences of 9/11. After 9/11, the United States government recreates its entire security systems, all of its airports, all of its police stations, all of its public spaces, all of the government buildings. They redo the security on all of them. It used to be that you were able to fly without even an identification. You could just get on a plane and fly, and there was no metal detectors on planes. And like you used to be able to I would be able to walk on the plane carrying my wife's suitcase for her, load it up, kiss her goodbye, and then get off the plane and leave and go home. And then she would fly. You know what I mean? Like you used to be able to do that, and you can't do that anymore, right? The airports are all locked down. The buildings are all locked down. A lot of these things, like you can't go on tours of these public buildings and without licenses and without all this other stuff. It also changes America because we're going to enter our two longest wars in American history. The United States declares war on Afghanistan within just a couple of months, within a couple of weeks. We start bombing Afghanistan the next day. We're also going to invade Iraq 2 years later. All of this is because 9/11. Okay, terrorism is going to become a regular topic that's going to be on the news every day. It's going to be part of American culture from this point forward, right? And it's going to inform everything from like how we treat a Muslim kid in our classroom all the way up to how the CIA files their reports. So we'll talk about some of these things as we get moving forward. Some of these changes that are kind of hard. Again, this is the world you live in. You've never seen the world before this, right? But for somebody even my age, I was not very old. I was 22 when this happened, right? But I was old enough to have seen the world before and then seen the world after, right? But for somebody who is in their 30s or in their 40s or in their 50s, things are so profoundly different that it feels like another country. It changes the kinds of television shows that are on TV. It changes the kinds of television shows, the kinds of movies, the kind of music that it changes the nature of political debate. It changes the nature of the way we talk about things. It changes our textbooks. It changes our classroom lectures, our debates. It changes the rules on everything. Right. And 9/11 changed my day-to-day life probably, 100, 200 ways. And it's all to you normal. Right. And it's one of these things that when you talk to old people, and I say old, like old people like in their 40s, people who are in their 40s or above, right, they will all be able to recognize that this is one of these turning points in American history. Right. And it's maybe for you, coronavirus might be that. Right. Because you remember a world before coronavirus and now you remember a world of coronavirus. Maybe coronavirus, we have to wait and see what coronavirus does.
Yeah.
Right. But if like masks become a reality for the next 5 or 10 years, if vaccines and stuff become a reality for the next 5 to 10 years, if walking into the classroom and scrubbing your desk before every class becomes an online teaching and online working and all that stuff, like coronavirus might be one of these changing points. It's a little early to tell, but we definitely know 9/11 is. Right. Everything on September 12th was different. Yeah. We're going to leave it there. We're going to stop. I'm going to stop the recording.